The halls of Prometheus. Celestia took a breath as she meditated, clearing her mind as she focused on the warp. Ahead she could feel the presence of Nocturne, and beyond that the fortress moon of Prometheus the salamanders used to shield their charges. Beyond, she could feel the numbness brought upon by the hive mind, the faint cries of a billion chittering monsters echoing in the furthest reaches of her perception. Neither seemed to be intersecting, yet. Celestia took another breath, dismissing that path of inquiry as she turned her attention back to her fleet. She could feel the growing light that was twilight, flickering in and out as they continued their transit through the warp. With her power growing as it was only a matter of time before the other denizens of the warp took notice, or she attempted to take matters into her own hands and overstretched herself. Celestia knew Twilight could handle the latter, but the former. I still have time to train her. She thought. She will be fine. The others were slightly less bright among the tides of the Immaterium, such that Celestia had to focus further to pick out individuals. The sororitas that had attached themselves to Twilight were calm lights among the void, their faith and prayers a surprising bulwark against the Immaterium. The Inquisitor and his henchmen were much the same, perhaps more weary from their own encounters against the Tyranids. All were strong points from which Twilight could draw upon. All she needed was to remember how best to do that. Empress. Celestia recalled her soul as one of her companions stepped into her room. We are preparing for the return to real space. Good. Celestia rose, straightening out her armor before continuing. Have all personnel report to their stations. I have glimpsed through the warp and have not found sign of battle, but we must be prepared nonetheless. Yes, Empress. Her companion departed, Celestia following soon after. She could feel the mechanics of the battleship working as they prepared for re-entry, the ship humming with every step she took. Soldiers and crewmen ducked past her, Celestia keeping her attention forward so they would not feel the need to genuflect before her. Eventually she reached the bridge, just as the navigators called out in preparation. Destination point reached. Exiting warp space in 3, 2, 1. Outside, space contorted as a glowing warp rift opened, spitting the battleship and select escorts out before winking out of existence. Soon other craft joined it, the Sanguinium Martyrs breaking through first, followed soon by preliminary Dark Angel attack cruisers. Celestia would give the fleet a few more minutes to form up, then they could proceed. Before the fleet lay the planet of Nocturne, partially eclipsed by its moon Prometheus. The planet's surface shimmered with volcanic activity, flashes of red and yellow breaking through thick clouds of ash like fireworks in a night sky. Around the moon she could see another fleet of ships, some bearing the green and black of the salamanders while others bore the insignias of many other chapters of Astaroths, some familiar while others eluded her memory. The fleet barely reacted as the Crusade Armada pulled out of warp space, continuing their vigil around Prometheus as the newcomers pulled closer. Empress, one of the bridge officers said. We are receiving a communication from the leading battle barge. Open comms, she replied. I will hear what my sons have to say. There was a pause before the message came through, a brief bout of static filling the bridge before a voice spoke. By the marks on your ships you are of the fleet under the Empress of Mankind, the voice said. You speak to the Empress herself, Celestia replied. We come seeking war against the hive mind, not Prometheus. We gathered, it is a dark day when the greatest of mankind come hunting for the lowliest, the voice replied. I am Fukin Mirshen, Forge Father of the Salamanders. It is an honor to have one as illustrious as yourself in our presence, though I believe you may have been misdirected. The honor is all mine, Mirshen. Celestia replied. Though, misdirected? How so? There are no Tyranids here, at least not as far as I know. The Forge Father gave a short sigh. We were preparing to travel to Rynn's world, where the jaws of Cetus close in around our brothers in arms. But with your arrival, perhaps the plight of the Southern Imperium may be cleansed. Celestia massaged her chin with her hand. Perhaps Masha's Psyker had been wrong in her prophecy, but then she was not explicit in Prometheus being attacked directly. While time is of the essence, she said. I would like to speak with you before departure, so I may get a better understanding of the situation that awaits us on Rynn's world. Of course. Mirshen replied. Your ships will no doubt need time to refuel and resupply for the mission ahead. I will alert Chapter Master Jurarth of your arrival. Of course. Celestia said. I look forward to speaking with you in person. With that the message closed out, Celestia shifting on her feet for a moment before speaking again. Put me through to the rock, I will speak to the lion. Yes, my Empress. There was another pause as the connection reached the rock, Celestia mulling over her next actions before the comms crackled again. Empress. The lion's voice echoed through the bridge. Johnson. Celestia replied. We will be convening with the salamanders on Prometheus. The tactical situation has changed and I would like us all to be of the same understanding. The Tyranids attack the sons of Dorn rather than those of Fukin. Johnson said. I figured as much with how the tides of the warp are being reported. If we are to attack, may I suggest a two-wave assault to ensure the creatures are properly engaged? I will consider it. Even with our forces here we need to be prepared for what tricks the Tyranids may have prepared for us. Once we have consulted with the salamanders, Korax, and others who have battled the hive mind, we can draw together our strategy for the coming war. Of course. One did not have to be Empress to detect the disappointment in the lion's voice. I will meet you on Prometheus, then. I am sure we will have much to discuss. Celestia said as the comm closed out. She cast another glance towards Nocturne, watching as the lava fields flared once more through the haze. It has been too long since I have visited this world. She thought, her mind drifting back to the fields of fire where she had met Fukin millennia ago. If only it were under better circumstances. Nevertheless, we must be prepared. I shall not fail the Imperium again. Korax waited in silence as he and the Empress descended towards Prometheus. She had not said much, but the Primarch was more than capable of figuring out what was on her mind, planning for the next stage of the campaign, searching for a means by which she would not sacrifice her army to only slow the Tyranids down. Korax had seen lesser men driven to madness in an attempt to solve that issue. Perhaps the Empress would fare better. The lander jostled as they reached the ground, though Korax and the others aboard barely moving. The Empress was the first to approach the exit, waiting patiently while the ship made full contact before opening to Prometheus. Korax made his way through the Empress' entourage of custodes, stopping by her side just as the door opened. You never set foot on Prometheus during the crusade, did you? The Empress asked as they left the ship. I did visit several millennia after the heresy, during my search for absolution. Korax said as he looked around. I cannot say that much has changed since then. Prometheus was, perhaps, a bit more hospitable than Nocturne itself, but only because the volcanic activity of the moon was slightly less than that of its mother planet. Even within the spaceport the salamanders had constructed there seemed to drift a thin haze of ash, swirling about asteroids and men like darkened ghosts. Out of the shadows Korax could see Terra followed closely by the Inquisitor, his henchman, and the Sororitas, Terra waving her hand in her face to break up the ash cloud as best she could. Not exactly a hospitable place, she said once she reached them, but then everywhere else we've visited hasn't been much better. Perhaps the Tyranids might invade a paradise world during our travels, one of the Valhallans said, earning a jab from the other. Atmospherically it may be harsh, but the residents of Prometheus are not known for turning away guests, the Empress said. Now be on alert, our hosts have arrived. Korax shifted his gaze again, spotting a trio of green-clad asteroids approaching for a different hangar. The leader of the group was cloaked in a fine drake-scale cape, his helmet tucked under one arm to reveal his face to the group. Like all of the sons of Fukin, his skin was as black as Korax's armor, his eyes like smoldering embers, but like Korax's missing brother carried an air of friendliness about him that far offset all other features. The salamanders stopped before the Empress, the leader giving a respectful bow before speaking. Welcome to Prometheus, Empress, he said. I am Mir Shen. Well met, the Empress returned the bow before continuing. Lord Korax of the Raven Guard should be known to you, and this is my personal student, Terra. The Forge Father regarded Terra for a moment, stepping away from the Empress before speaking to the young woman. I have not heard much of the Empress student, he said, pausing before smiling and offering his free hand. But I look forward to serving alongside you nonetheless. Terra hesitated, more out of surprise at the gesture of Mir Shen offering a hand to shake, but she soon broke out of her surprise and returned the gesture. "If we are finished with pleasantries," Johnson said as he and his followers came up behind Tara. "We have a campaign to plan." Tara seemed to withdraw towards the shadows with the lion's arrival, but she did appear to be keeping a calm face before the Astaroths and Primarchs in her midst. "Of course," Mir Shen said, seemingly taking on similar reservations as Tara. "Please, this way." The Empress took point, following the Forge Father as he and the Salamanders led them further into the base. Johnson, unaccustomed to normal pleasantries as he was, pushed on ahead to stay close to the Empress, while Korax, Tara, and the others followed behind. The young psyker seemed content to speak with her fellows, so Korax allowed his attention to drift as he listened into the various conversations. "You have caught us in a most difficult time, Empress," he heard Mir Shen say. "The time of trials has struck Nocturne, and with so many of our brothers assisting the battle against Cetus we find ourselves lacking in forces to send to your aid." "In time," the Empress replied. "You have your families and world to worry about, after all. But when the trials have passed and Cetus lies broken, I look forward to battling alongside all of the sons of Nocturne. We welcome the honor, Empress." "I see that the sons of Fukin have not changed their demeanor," the lion said, slowing his pace so he could speak with Korax. "In this time of uncertainty, that we can find welcoming allies at all bodes well for our mission." Korax replied. "That you are even speaking to me must be a side effect." Johnson gave a scoff. "You have changed, Korax, else you would not be speaking so highly of welcome tidings over clinging to the shadows." "I change as needed, Johnson." Korax cast a short glance over his shoulder, spotting Tara chucking at something the shorter Sororitas said. "My absolution may still elude me, but there is a time and place for clinging to old reservations. Do not tell me you were won over by the student, were you?" Korax furrowed his brow as he looked to the lion. "Student of the Empress she may be, she is a child grasping at things she cannot begin to comprehend. She is a liability to the Empress and the Crusade if she is kept coddled like this. Do not underestimate Tara." Korax countered. "There is potential within her that even the Empress does not see. To keep her away for fear of her relative inexperience is to stifle that potential before it has the ability to mature. I do not fear inexperience on the battlefield. If I did, our numbers would be far depleted for want of experienced troops." The lion kept his focus ahead, though Korax could see the frustration on the other Primarch's face. "It is here inexperience off the battlefield that is so dangerous. She knows nothing of war, of what we were created for, and her attempts at understanding are beyond naive. She will only slow us down until her blundering leads to deaths beyond imaginable. Perhaps if your critiques take on airs other than quiet contempt, we would not reach such a point." Korax muttered, just enough that the lion did not hear him. Johnson was long on trust and short on respect, Korax knew, but there came a point when stubbornness eclipsed normal caution. Perhaps the lion just needed to be reminded of what that point was. Korax had fallen silent for the remainder of the trip, letting his observations broaden again. They had been led towards a larger building, great doors overshadowed by a carving of two drakes rising towards each other, Korax noting that the one on the right was slightly larger than the others. Fukin had spoken at length of the challenge that led to his service for the Emperor, so seeing some remembrance of Korax's old friend was welcoming, pleasant, a reminder of what was lost due to arrogance and stupidity. Given the Empress' brief hesitation as she crossed the threshold, most likely the latter. "Jurarth is not here, unfortunately," Mir Shen explained as he and other salamanders led them further into the citadel. "He is on Nocturne making sure the preparations for the time of trials have been properly carried out. I have been asked to speak in his stead, though," the salamander gave a sheepish grin. "I am not much for grand speeches and master planning like he is. All of us have the opportunity for greatness, though," the Empress countered. "Perhaps not in the ways we see it, but even the shadows of giants have edges." Mir Shen seemed to accept that, giving another smile as they came to a stop in a larger atrium. 7 great seats had been arranged in a circle, centered in a large map of the galaxy. The Empress and the lion stepped towards the display with Korax and Mir Shen following behind, they were no strangers to campaign planning, but despite her claims the shadow of the Empress was not one to easily get out of in these matters. This map is up to date, the Empress looked to Mir Shen. As of the last report we received from Rynn's world, yes, the Forge Father replied. 2 companies of my brothers are there along with the Crimson Fists and other chapters, as well as supporting Imperial Guard regiments, and they try to keep our communication lines as open as possible. The feat must be impressive, the Lion said, zooming the map closer to the planet in question. I have studied these creatures since my awakening. They project a psychic null field that blocks all warp travel, be it by ship or telepathic communication. Since they appear to be trying to envelop Rynn's world in its entirety, that field must be particularly strong. All fortresses have weak points. Mir Shen countered. We were just lucky enough to find a few gaps within the shadow we could use to break through. Gaps? Korix mused. Intentionally set or not? That will be our point of entry, then. The Empress said. The only way Rynn's world and the rest of the Southern Imperium is to survive is if we find a way to break through that field reliably. I could smash my way through with a bit of focus, but there is always the risk of the hive mind pressing back in such a way they trap us there. We'll need a suitable beachhead. Johnson examined the map a bit closer. If enough of their more potent psychic nodes are disabled, you can stabilize the rifts long enough for adequate reinforcements to arrive. And I suppose you would be the one leading the charge? Korix asked, perhaps a bit too curtly than he intended. The Lion did not seem to notice. If the Empress is to hold the Hive fleet at bay, she cannot do both that and command armies in the field at the same time. We have the resources where the 3 of us can strike the Tyranids from multiple points in a number of ways. The Xenos will be hard-pressed to adapt to all threats coming against them. With all due respect, my lord, Mir Shen said. The Tyranids are equally known for their adaptability, and Cetus is no exception. Whatever advantage a change in tactics may have will not last long before they can counter us. Then we shall have to strike swiftly, won't we? The Lion countered. Mir Shen did not seem to have a reply to that, instead giving a half-hearted nod before turning his attention back to the map. If you are seeking to attack the Hive nodes, our reconnaissance flights have told us the main command centers are situated on the second continent Magellan. Mir Shen shifted the map so a display of Rynn's world's geography appeared. Most of the fighting has shifted to the primary continent Sorako, which brings us to the matter of civilians. There are still nearly 30 million non-combatants on the planet, most within the planetary capital of New Rynn City. We have done our best to evacuate the populace from the path of the Hive fleet, but we are running out of places to move them before they are swept away as well. We will not have to worry long about shunting non-combatants from one city to another, the Lion muttered. If this plan is successful, Rynn's world will be back in our hands with little trouble, then we can address the civilian question. Do not be so dismissive, Johnson, the Empress said. These are my subjects we are discussing. After all, she looked back to the map. If conditions are right, we can see about evacuating as many as we can until the Tyranids are defeated. The fleet will provide adequate protection for them. The Rhinites and the Crimson Fists will be forever in your debt, no doubt. Mir Shen said. We have already taken on a number of refugees here, but with Cetus attacks and our own trials it has proven difficult. No matter the costs, we shall do all we can to save Rynn's world and her people. The Empress looked to Mir Shen. You have my word as Empress that this will be carried out. You shall not find us wanting, Empress. On the matter at hand, the Lion said. Korix can take a force to move to the civilian locations and perhaps relieve the Crimson Fists at their fortress, if it still stands upon our arrival. I will take my sons to attack the Tyranids on Magellan to break their psychic shroud, and then the Empress can bring the main force to crush the Xenos completely. A two-wave assault might mean delays if we are required to bring our full force to bear, the Empress mused. But then a forceful attack might knock the aliens off balance long enough for a killing strike. There was a pause before she spoke again. Yes, we will try this. I will need all the focus I can get to make sure the fleet actually gets through the shadow in the first place. What about the civilians? Korix and the others turned to see Terra stepping up. Moving 30 million people to safety in the middle of a war zone will cause so many logistical problems that might cause plenty of deaths without there being enemies to worry about. The Empress' words were that evacuation was tentative on the conditions being favorable. Student Johnson responded, furrowing his brow. We cannot divert resources just to guard civilians without losing the rest of the planet. Of course. Tara shot back. But when conditions are favorable. Do you have a plan for that, or would it just boil down to kill more Tyranids? Favorable as that would be, Tara does have a point. Corax offered. All the battle plans and glorious victories won't mean much if there's nothing left of Rynn's world to show for it. Agreed, the Empress said, giving a nod. Tara, draw up a plan to organize the civilian population for evacuation of Rynn's world should the need and opportunity arise. Take as much time as you need. The journey to Rynn's world is a long one, but I am sure you will come up with a most satisfactory plan. If the Empress noticed Johnson's scoff, she did not make mention of it. I'll do my best. Tara said, beaming. I promise you I won't let you down. And at the very least it will keep the Lion's criticisms to a minimum, Corax thought. Organization would be a simple task, and Corax had seen Tara's preliminary work on Caesarea before everything went to the warp. She would be a perfect choice to make sure civilians were kept away from rampaging hordes of Tyranids and the soldiers intent on killing them. As the discussion continued, Corax spotted movement among the shadows of the citadel. It was a slight movement, a flicker followed by prolonged stillness, but Corax was no fool not to recognize what he had seen. Somehow, even with the hive mind bearing down upon the Imperium, Lorgar was watching them. Celestia and the Primarchs had more planning to do, and Mascius had left to gather some supplies he had ordered prior to leaving Caesarea. That left Twilight alone to explore the spaceport of Prometheus for a day or so, and perhaps begin some drafts of her plan to evacuate Rynn's world. Twilight stifled a yawn as she fanned through another report on Soraka's food distribution. Several hours of hard studying on Rynn's world had given her a better perspective on the besieged agri-world, but there was still so much more she had to learn before any plan could be implemented, making sure there were still healthy civilians to evacuate being high on her list of priorities. That she did not get the best night of sleep before their arrival on Prometheus did not exactly help matters either. Come on, Twilight, she thought as she opened the report again. You've pulled dozens of all-nighters before you can get through this one with no problem. Her confidence renewed, she grabbed a nearby pen and continued jotting down her notes, humming some song Pinky had taught her to keep herself focused. She continued for several minutes before there was a knock at the door. Who is it? Lord Meershen would like to speak with you, Tara, Veronica called through the door. Are you able to speak with him? Oh, of course. Twilight set her work aside and rose to face the door. Please let him in. There was a pause before Veronica pushed open the door, the Forge Father stepping in shortly after. The Space Marine still seemed as friendly as ever, despite his rather frightening visage, and Twilight could not help but let a smile form on her face. Good morning, Miss Tara, Meershen said as Veronica closed the door behind him. I hope I did not disturb you. Of course not. Twilight replied. I was just trying to get my information together before we head out. I know Rynn's world is something like 4 months away. 6 months? Meershen corrected. Right, but the point is I want to have all my information together before we get there, so if the Empress wants to implement my plan, it'll only take a day or two of explanation instead of a week of coordination. I see. Meershen crossed to Twilight's table, picking up some of her notes and giving them a quick scan through. Interesting script. Where did you learn this? Twilight blinked in surprise before realizing that most of her notes were scratched out in Equestrian. Oh dear. Oh, that, she said, giving a nervous chuckle. That's just my homeworld's dialect. It's very obscure and hard to learn. Interesting, the Forge Father flipped through her notes again. What is the name of this planet? Perhaps one of my brothers has visited and knows the language. Probably not. Twilight mumbled, drawing a confused glance from Meershen. Oh, I mean the planet's called Equus 3. Yes, that's how it translates into Gothic. Equus 3, Mir Shen looked back to Twilight's notes. Unusual name. It draws from the old Gothic term for horse, does it not? The Forge Father turned back and regarded Twilight for a moment. Most likely founded by former soldiers, then. You appear to have some mix of Kadian and Mordian stock in your blood, so the possibility is not unlikely. Oh, right. Twilight fidgeted. Mir Shen was merely being friendly, she knew, but any more probing questions might lead to her slipping up about Equestria and Celestia's true identity. The salamander might not react too poorly to the revelation, but then when did anything meet expectations with this place? Regardless, I'm sure your plan is a fine one, and I look forward to seeing it implemented. Mir Shen set Twilight's notes down and turned to face her. That is partially why I sought you out, to thank you. Really? Twilight asked, one eyebrow raised. Too many Asteroids and men of power seem to neglect what we are truly fighting for, the continued survival of mankind. Mir Shen gave a small sigh. Some of my colleagues would think that killing Xenos and heretics is the most reliable option, but at what cost? Should we destroy mankind along with our enemies? Of course not. Twilight said. We just seem to rush from battle to battle without really considering what we leave behind. I think that's why Lord Johnson doesn't like me all that much. I'm not doing things on his schedule. The Dark Angels have always been a proud and aggressive chapter, Mir Shen offered. Their Primarch appears to be no exception. Do not fault him if he comes off as too harsh, for that is what he is most used to in these times of trouble. At the very least we should be thankful that Lord Corax and the Empress are present to provide some alternative to the Dark Angels' approach. I suppose. Twilight looked back at her notes. I guess I'm just not that used to such harsh criticisms like that. A few arguments and some debate, maybe, but total rejection. Give it time, and perhaps Lord Johnson will be more open to your ideas. Mir Shen said, offering Twilight a friendly smile. Twilight quickly found herself returning the gesture as Mir Shen continued. It is good to see that the Empress has chosen such a kind soul to be her student. Oh, thank you. Twilight brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. It's been a while since anyone's said that to me. Most just call me naive. The sons of Fukin are no strangers to such criticisms. One of our former chapter masters, Tu Shan, nearly killed another Asteroids commander who bombarded a civilian encampment during the Third War for Armageddon and passed it off as nothing. Twilight allowed a small gasp of shock. Compassion is a dwindling resource in the Imperium, Terra. Cherish the gift you have been given, for it gives you a strength that not even the foulest monsters of the warp can overcome, even if your allies do not always understand it. Twilight found herself chewing her lip. Such words of encouragement were hard to come by in this universe, even from Celestia at times. Now that she was hearing it from a space marine, Twilight felt at a loss. Thank you, Mir Shen, she said finally. It's been difficult, trying to stay optimistic with everything going on around me. I'll be sure to take your words to heart. It will be a dark day for the Imperium when you don't. Mir Shen replied. Now, I have other duties to attend to. Perhaps before we march for Ryn's world, we can talk again about your plan. Oh, I'd love to. Twilight cried before she realized she was still in a somewhat formal setting. I mean, I would be honored to discuss it with you, if the Empress does find the plan to her liking. Of course. By your leave, and with that Mir Shen was gone, slipping through the door as Sister Veronica opened it for the Asteroids. She paused for a moment before looking in at Twilight. Did everything go well with the Forge Father? She asked. Oh yes. Twilight said, still beaming. Everything went far better than I could have imagined.